Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Lunch with the Library. This program is intended for teens and adults, but feel free to have everyone join in. If you have questions for our next speakers, leave us a comment. Feel free to tell us what you're reading, and for those more in-depth questions, please call or email the library. Our chats here focus on reading and books. On our panel today, we have Tina, Jen, and Jacob. My name is Molly, and I will be moderating this morning. I'm going to have you introduce yourselves. Tina, let's start with you.
My name is Tina. I work at the LAD branch for the Cedar Rapids Public Library.
Jen, go ahead.
I'm Jen, and I'm a programming. Hi. My name is Jen, and I'm a programming librarian at the LAD branch.
And I am Jacob, and I am a programming specialist at the library in general, focusing mostly with teens.
Great. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started with our first question. This is an easy one. What are you reading right now? Jacob, I'm going to have you start this.
Well, I'm currently in the midst of about 3 different things because that's where my mind's at lately. One is called A Collective Bargain by Jan McAlvery. I can't pronounce the last name. And then I'm also reading a translated book of Chinese science fiction short stories called Broken Stars. And then I'm also reading a comic book that I can't even pronounce the name of. It's like Russian, so I don't know.
Awesome. That's quite the diverse range there that you have going.
Got to keep yourself guessing, right?
That's right. Jen, go ahead.
I am reading The Glass Castle by Emily St. John Mandel. She wrote Station 11. And I'm also reading Backstagers, which is a graphic novel or comic series about theater kids, essentially, in high school that are superhero-y. So, yeah.
Nice. Tina, I saw you nodding along. Have you read that one?
Yes, I have. I actually recommended it to Jen.
True story.
It's very good. For me, currently, I am reading, I got to remember here, it's The Library of the Unwritten. It's by A.J. Hackwith. I downloaded it on the cloud. And I just found out today that I have the 9th house ready for me to download on Overdrive. So I'm excited about that.
Awesome. Okay, here is our next question. This one's a little tougher and might make you embarrassed answering it. Then I'm going to go ahead and start with you. Do you judge books by their cover?
It's fun. Okay, so when I was younger, absolutely. And if I'm browsing, like I haven't been told about any books that I should be reading. I haven't been doing any research with reviews of like books that are coming out that are like have a lot of buzz. If I'm just browsing the stacks, you bet I judge a book by its cover. But most of the time I'm picking my books based on what other people have been telling me they really loved and like what I've seen come up in the reviews, like just to kind of know what, because if they're coming up in reviews consistently, I'm like, chances are my patrons are going to want to know what those books are. And so I try to hit off ones that look interesting to me. But yeah, if I'm browsing, I'm going to make sure, if you don't have pretty art cover, I'm not going to be that interested.
Tina, we're going to go over to you next.
I usually don't. I mean, obviously a really nice cover will grab your attention. But I usually go with reviews or what my colleagues recommend. I usually don't really look too much at the cover. And a lot of what I read, I do, ebooks. And a lot of times those covers are not that great. So I usually just go by either what the content is, what a colleague has to say, or a review.
Jacob, how about you?
I agree with them both. Generally it depends on like if it's from an author that I've read before or it's recommended by a coworker or a friend, or less reliably if it's by an author that I like who recommends it, like they have a little blurb on the cover, then sure, I might give it a shot. But again, that's a bit of I've been burned a lot on that one. But otherwise, yeah, if I'm going in cold to something, yeah, I'm definitely going to try to limit my options as much as possible. Otherwise, I'm going to drown. Yeah.
So the consensus seems to be, let's have some good artwork, because I am definitely judgy. I mean, I read mostly young adult fiction, and so if I see a back cover, I'm like, well, that one's gonna be gone by. But I feel like they usually try with the artwork sometimes. There's a lot of samey stuff happening though, so anyway. Okay, next one, Tina, we're gonna start with you for this one. How often do you correctly predict the ending of a book?
That kind of depends. It depends on the book. It's definitely happened, but there's been a lot that I've been completely off base on. So I would say probably 50-50.
All right, Jacob, how about you?
If I'm trying to like guess the ending of a book, I might as well just throw it out the door. Like when I read a book, I am there to be taken by the hand by the author and led through their world. And if it's going to be to a point where I'm actively trying to like get ahead of them, I'm bored or it's bad. So, the worst thing is when I completely lose respect for the book, I just start scribbling in the margins, side comments to amuse myself. But otherwise, yeah, I don't generally try to predict endings. I just try to let the book speak for itself.
Jen, how about you?
I would say I'm like an 80%er. So I actually don't read back covers. When I read reviews, I read what other people have said about the book. Mm-hmm. I try not to read anything about the plot, because if I don't go in cold, it's really, really hard for me to not like for my brain to shut that part of itself off. Cause I'm like, ooh, if this is this, like, I just want to fill in the holes as I'm reading. So I need to go in as cold as possible. Otherwise, usually about like midway through the book, I'm like, and it's going to end like this. Yep. And 80% of the time I'm like, yep, it totally did. I do have to say YA, that's maybe like 90%. Mm-hmm. Just because it tends to be more formulaic a little bit. And it's the same kind of stories. You know, we have our coming of age, there's like the teenage romance kind of thing. So there's definitely experience stuff that tends to be kind of repetitive. So it's easier to make those judgment calls. Mm-hmm. But yeah, when a book surprises me, I'm just like, and I will never forget you, book. Right? You were amazing.
5 stars. Yeah. No, I'm the same way, Jen. I like it's rough in the young adult world, which I mean, that's who I work with most of the time, and so that's what I read mostly. And so it's pretty rough. I would say again 90%. And if a book surprises me, I'm like, oh, I love you forever and always. I will keep you. Or if it's just touching. So. Anyway, yeah, that's a good suggestion, though, going in as cold as you can without reading anything about it. Yeah, I might have to try that in the future. Okay, that's enough talk, though. How about tell us about that time that a book truly shocked you? So it came out of nowhere. Jacob, go ahead.
Came out of nowhere. I'm going to go with Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. That is a book that is like increasing levels of atrocity rendered across 300 pages in the background of like the American West heyday of like all the, gunslingers and all that fun stuff. And it's a bit of an anti-Western in that it's just all of these horrible things that happened in like the mid 19th century. And it just builds up into, I was absolutely rendered numb physically and mentally by the end of that book.
That sounds fun.
I'm not going to read it again.
Oh. Tina, how about you?
Well, I actually had 2 that came to mind for me. So the Divergent series, the last in that series by Veronica Roth. It was a Legion, I believe. I remember reading the end of it, and I was so angry that I actually physically threw the book because I did not like how it ended at all. The other one was Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. That was another one that had some real twists and turns and very unpredictable, and that made me feel a lot of different emotions, a lot. And it shocked me, for sure. Definitely.
Jen, do you have one?
So I'm going to go with an oldie but a goodie, and The Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie. I read a lot. I really enjoy mystery. And I guess I fall in the cozy mystery section or whatever. I don't like gritty. I don't really want to know the details of how people died. It's enough for me to be like, and they're dead. And I can move on from that. And part of the enjoyment of mysteries for me is trying to see if I'm going to figure it out before the book inspector or detective does. And this one, so with mysteries, it's like a fine line with me. Sherlock Holmes, like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, leaves out too many details, and he gets his details confused because, drugs. But he, like that, like, I'm like, well, I would never figure this out. Like, there's just no way. But I feel like Agatha Christie does a really good job of putting enough information into her books without completely tipping her hand. But this one, I was just completely surprised. So that's the book that whenever I get that question, it's the one that always surprises me. I did read it when I was like 20 some. I reread it, but I remember just being like, oh, you can end a book this way? No. So
I think that's really great. I appreciate a book that does that detail work. It lays the groundwork, and so you aren't left like, where did this character even come from? Like, who is this character in this story that just, surprise, here I am. So yeah, I much enjoy detail work, and sometimes that doesn't happen in young adult works, but that's okay. It's fine. So Jen, you mentioned you're not a big fan of the grit and the gore. Is there any other thing that is like nope, I'm done with this? Can you tell us about that?
If I don't like the main character or the main voice, within the first, I don't know. It depends on if I'm reading or if I'm listening. If I'm listening, it's much quicker because I'm like, I cannot handle you. I don't know what it is about it being auditory, but if the voice is not something that I can handle, I'm just like, no, thank you. So that's okay. So Harry Potter. I love Harry Potter. I read it every year. I always skipped the 5th book because I hated Harry in that one. He was so whiny, and I get it. Like, orphan, fighting the world's most evil villain. I don't care. Suck it up, Buttercup. Like, it drove me insane. And I mean, as I've gotten older, like, I read the 5th book now, but I didn't always, because of just how grating and essentially how effective J.K. Rowling is at portraying a middle school boy. But yeah, if the main character or the main voice in the first 50 pages is not someone that I feel like I'm clicking with, I'm done.
Tina, how about you? Is there a nope for you?
I'm not a big fan of animal abuse. That really bothers me a lot. Yeah. I can't really say that it's not really something that stops me. It might stop me from actually reading a book if I hear that that's what it's about. But if I'm reading something and something is in there, I have a really hard time stopping a book. It's just a really tough challenge for me. But that is something that I do not enjoy reading about at all.
I think it's really interesting though, and especially in books and movies, I find that it's just a device a lot of the time,
Often,
which
yeah.
is another reason why I hate it so much. Like if there was, I mean, I would never, I hate it no matter what, period. But it's like, here's a shock value, you know, like let's try and be shocking when really they're just using another mechanic in their writing
Yep.
or in their TV show. And so that's what
Yes.
it's like. Violence for violence sake is my big nope. I'm like, nah, I don't care about that anymore.
Mhm.
No, bye. Jacob, how about you?
There's nothing content-wise that is going to get me to automatically nope out of a book. At least it hasn't happened yet. It might exist. I just haven't found it yet. Mostly what gets me to stop reading a book is things like bad prose, like a cliche plot, flat characters, unearned drama. Like my big issue with YA was always like, there's always this small incident that causes everything to spiral. I'm just like, oh, come on. Like, I get it, hormones, but can we do a little bit more with this, please? And it just, yeah. So any two or three of those four, and I'm out.
Okay, I'm going to move us to our last question. And Jacob, I'm going to start with you again. Tell me about a book that you've read lately that had good atmosphere.
It's been mostly nonfiction. I just kind of got started on the fiction one again. So I might have to go back to the first two Altered Carbon books, the ones that inspired the Netflix show. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of that. It really it had that, kind of hardcore, gritty cyberpunk vibe to it that I've always kind of had a soft spot for. And it just, a cocky PI or mercenary or whatever is just always something that's like, it's into a lot of niches, but it was just kind of charming and interesting in world building. And I think that was the last one that like truly struck me in terms of atmosphere.
Jen, how about you?
I have two books. The first one is Once Upon a River by Diane Setterfield. She wrote the 13th Tale, and a lot of her novels focus around like turn of the century, late 1800s England, and all of her stories are about kind of there's mystery involved, but also there's this kind of your typical like Dickens story of it just being kind of damp and foggy, and she does a really great job of painting that kind of world, both that there's like a lot of elegance, but also that there's just kind of dirt, I guess, or uncleanliness. Like I think of like modern novels a lot of times, and they are like where things take place are very clean and I don't know, just I think of like an Apple ad. This, you get this sense of sumptuousness, of like realness, of whenever I read her books, I just can immediately picture like the English countryside, dark, damp, candles. Like it's not hard to think of that time period at all. And then the second one that I recently read was Fleischman's in Trouble by Taffy Broderson. And I thought she did a great job with kind of bringing in the atmosphere of New York, upper crust New York, really kind of nailing also what it would be like to be a divorcee dad, and what that would look like when your wife makes all of the money and then you end up getting divorced from her. I can picture she talked a lot about his apartment and how there was nothing in it really. And she talked about the vertical blinds and the stain on the ceiling. And you're just like, yeah, this is where a man that gets divorced from his high-powered wife, this is where he goes, So those are my books.
Yay! Tina, how about you?
Well, I really do enjoy reading graphic novels. And for me, one that had great atmosphere was Monstrous. It's just a beautifully intricate, dark fantasy elements. It's just got all of it. It's so phenomenal. I would spend hours just looking at the pictures. I just really loved immersing myself in that. And I just love that atmosphere, that dark. Yeah, it's just beautiful. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. Series, I should say. But that for me was definitely one that sticks out in my head for a great atmosphere.
That reminds me of the one that I had picked. And it's interesting because I feel like that dark kind of gritty atmosphere is what holds on to you more than just like the pleasant stuff, like that sad apartment is going to be the place that you think about. So mine that I read was House of Salt and Sorrows by Erin Craig. It's a young adult novel. And I would say that 90% of this book is really awesome. I love how she writes, and it's told in this oceanside manor house, and that she just talks about how it's dark and you can kind of, it's almost like you can hear the waves as they crash up against the cliffside, and just how damp everything always is, and just like, and it's at its heart, I would say it's kind of gothic horror, which is interesting, and something that I haven't read recently in young adult. It gets weird at the end, so that's why I'm like, the writing's great, but I wish there was more here. That was not gods coming down from above. Anyway, sidetrack there. But it's really just the way that she writes. She has a lot of really interesting ghosts and things that she brings up in the book, and it's just really beautifully written. So that's the one that I am thinking of forever. I read it like a couple months ago now. I got it as an advanced reader copy. And I still will just think about it, like I get transported back to that world, and it's really amazing. Well, that is it for today, everyone. Thanks for joining us, especially to our panelists. So we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.